at this international seminar on public security, human rights, and democracy. This is held by the IREE, the Institute for the Reform of Relationships Between the State and Companies, and IMDP, the Brazilian Institute of Research Development. This seminar is coordinated by Walfrido Warde, Francisco Mendes, Raul Jungmann, Benedito Mariano, Rafael Valle, and Pedro Serran. The Institute for the Reform of Relations Between State and Business, the IREE, is an independent organization whose mission is to promote the democratic and plural debate, aiming to perfect the integration between the public and private sectors in Brazil. The Brazilian Institute for Education, Research, and Development, IDP, is a center of excellence in education, research, and extension. It has offices in Brasilia and São Paulo. It was created over 20 years ago and is one of the higher education institutions in Brazil with the highest respect, and it contributes directly to social, political, and economic transformations in our country. We'd like to take the opportunity to thank the O Estado de São Paulo newspaper for their partnership. They are transmitting these talks live here from this auditorium. I would now like to invite to our opening table the host of this session, the excellent Honorable Dr. Gilmar Mendes. He is a minister in the Supreme Federal Court. He was president of the court from 2008 to 2010. He has also been Solicitor General of the Union. He is a founding member of the IDP. We'd also like to invite the Honorable Minister of the Federal Court of Audit, Vinícius Marques de Carvalho. Vinícius Marques de Carvalho has a degree in law from the University of São Paulo, a doctorate in law from the USP, and in comparative law from the Université de Paris in Sorbonne. He was a visiting professor there since 2014. He is also a professor with a doctorate at the USP. I'd also like to invite the Honorable Governor of Acre, Mr. Gladson Cameli. Gladson de Lima Cameli is the governor of the state of Acre for the second time now. He has a degree in civil engineering from the Lutheran University of Amazonas. He has been a federal policymaker and other positions in the government of Acre. I'd also like to invite Walfrido Warde, who is a founding partner of Warde Attorneys and the author of over a dozen books with a highlight on the recently published Public Security, the mafia gain strength and threaten to take over the state. He has a doctorate in commercial law from the USP. Please have a seat, gentlemen. To begin this seminar, we are now going to broadcast a message sent by the Honorable Dr. Ricardo Lewandowski, Minister of Justice and Public Security, on the topic for an effective, legalistic, and democratic public security. Let's watch. I greet all the participants of the International Seminar on Public Security, Human Rights, and Democracy, and I especially commend you for the relevance of this topic. When we talk about public security, we are obviously considering crime not only at the national level, but also at the international level. And unfortunately, we must acknowledge that there has been a very important change in the very nature of crime. Typically, traditionally, crime used to operate in the analog world, and today it operates in the digital world. That is to say, crimes were committed in the factual world, in the phenomenological world. And today, crimes are essentially committed in the virtual world. Money laundering, cryptocurrencies, drug trafficking, human trafficking. In short, major crimes involving transnational criminal organizations today occur in the virtual world. Of course, there are those crimes that are still in a transitional phase between the analog world and the digital world, let's say in a hybrid world, hybrid environment. It is necessary for us to change our conception of combating crime and to develop the appropriate instruments to combat it, especially considering this change in the nature of crime. And it is clear that crime is a problem today that affects all social classes, and therefore it is something that is strongly linked not just to protecting essential and fundamental rights, but also excessive public security, because excessive public security impairs our rights, just as deficient public security also impairs fundamental rights. And of course, when fundamental rights are at stake, democracy itself is at stake. All right, now let's begin with the first session in this seminar, which will debate the topic of the seminar and its goals. I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Gilmar Mendes. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Mr. Walfrido Warde for the initiative and Mr. Carvalho, Governor Cameli, Governor Caiado, and Mr. Abreu as well, Raul Jungmann. I'd like to greet every one of you who is here with us, actually, and I'd like to give my congratulations for the initiative to the IREE and the IDP as well for organizing this seminar, which we all know is a strikingly important initiative. Events such as this allow us to have and hold an important debate about public security, which is an extremely sensitive topic in Brazil, and especially considering the history of Brazil, it has not always been handled with the depth and the responsibility that would be needed to reflect on this problem that affects our society for decades now. We really must acknowledge that in the sense of tackling crime, there is no room for magic solutions or hasty deliberations. It is also never excessive to go back to the quote by the US journalist Mencken: for every complex problem, there is always a simple solution that is also elegant and usually completely wrong. And unfortunately, public security is a topic where we usually have some very ready-made solutions that do not effectively answer or respond to the topic. And so, in that sense, I am very pleased to receive this invitation to speak and say a few words on the opening of this meeting, which has the goal of dealing with the growing advance of criminal organizations without ever losing sight of the fact that truly tackling criminality can only occur within the rule of law and respecting the paradigm of human rights and democracy, as the eminent Minister Lewandowski also mentioned. And so, over the various sessions that we will hold today and tomorrow, we will be able to discuss current topics that are very important, such as border security, fighting the drug trafficking cartels, money laundering, anti-mafia compliance, mass incarceration, and many other topics. Considering that here in this Congress we have the presence of countless public entities, public representatives, I'm confident that the solutions we are presenting are going to be very useful in formulating diagnoses and proposals about a wide range of aspects that compose the multifaceted topic of organized crime. So, imbued with this spirit, I would like to wish all of you a very prolific, a very excellent seminar. May today and tomorrow be for us an excellent experience and a lot of learning. Thank you. Thank you, Minister Gilmar Mendes. I'd now like to pass the floor to the Minister of the Comptrollership General of Brazil, Mr. Marques de Carvalho. Hello, good morning, everyone. I'd like to greet Minister Gilmar Mendes and to thank you for welcoming us here at IDP and for taking part in organizing the event. Also, the Honorable Governor of Acre, Gladson Cameli, Ronaldo Caiado from Goiás, Walfrido Warde, who had this amazing initiative to organize this event, discuss this topic, which is so important for Brazil today. I'd also like to greet all the other authorities present here today with us. When I was invited to this event, Walfrido invited me to give a talk on anti-mafia compliance, which I should mention is going to be today at 3 p.m. Brasilia time. I was very pleased with the invitation and started reflecting not just on the initiative, but also on the intersection between these topics, public security, and the work we carry out at the Comptrollership General of Brazil. As a policymaker, it's always good to work on this exercise, to find intersections and where they interact over the day, and as far as possible, and as far as they can be useful and important for managing public policies, to expand on them. Normally, when we talk about the Comptroller General of Brazil, we are dealing with topics linked to auditing public policies and programs. So in that sense, the public security policies, some programs, some contracts linked to this policy can be audited by the CGU, but that is a routine part of our day-to-day work. We also have the institutional integrity agenda, the public integrity agenda, and the private integrity agenda. All of these are linked and connected to the agenda to tackle, fight, and combat corruption. Normally, when we talk about combating corruption and link that with public security, we associate this question with the corruption of our police forces, which is evidently a problem. We cannot forget that. We must deal with this. We have militia forces here proving to us that we have a very serious problem. But today, there is another scope in the relationship between corruption and public security that we must start developing and facing. And this dimension comes to light, at least for me, it became very evident, very clearly, with this recent operation that occurred in Sao Paulo. We have the solicitor who took part in that operation here with us, and it showed the interweave between public contracts for essential public services and organized crime. And look, even if we are not dealing with traditional corruption linked to the state, even though there are no public employees, public servants involved, and nothing that directly harms public management, there is a very clear case of private corruption.
So we have to start treating the dimension of public security with an eye on the private world and how they can be a way of contaminating crime through private corruptions, which will certainly, because we know that these things happen inside of a complex problem, a complex society, reach the state, reach the public service, with consequences which will probably be very damaging for the society as a whole. We have to prevent that these things happen, these processes. And I believe this seminar today can be a important start, so we are able to organize these discussions inside of these parameters, together with many others. I'm speaking from my point of view as the CGU controller, and that we find a pathway so we can dimension these new challenges and understand that these challenges can be tackled from the federative aspect. We have Mr. Jungmann here that has worked with this topic, so we finally are able to build our public security system together with the Justice Ministry, the work they're doing with the CGU. We are going to help in whatever it's needed and possible, but we need to face this agenda, this topic, and build this system, take into consideration all this that Mr. Jungmann has mentioned. I'd like to thank for the invitation and wish that we have an excellent seminar, excellent debate today and tomorrow. Thank you so much. Let's listen now the governor of Acre, Gladson Cameli. Good morning, everyone. Thanks God for this opportunity. I'm going to read a speech to show a little bit of the reality that we live in the extreme north of Brazil, in my state, Acre. And for me, it's a great honor to be in this international seminar 2024 of public security, human rights and democracy, with the presence of many important lectors, authorities, people from the studies, research, and politicians in Brazil. As agents of social transformation, we are aware of the need to strengthen the union and actions around public security in Latin America, specifically in states with mixed border, which is the case of Acre and other states of the legal Amazon. I'd like to congratulate the Institute for the Reform of the Institute of Public Systems and Private for the initiative to promote this debate, which is broad, which will cover important aspects of the public security and the borders, together with the Minister of Defense, José Múcio, which will bring the topic of the borders, the threat of criminal associations and other topics that are related to organized crime. The security of the country is the interest of all of us. The current geopolitics, Acre is a state with many borders. It's more than 2,000 kilometers of borders with some of the countries which are major drugs trafficking countries, which happens in the Amazon. In our state, since 2010, we have a big flux of people from 39 nations, where mostly are from countries like Haiti, Senegal, and Venezuela. Around 45 immigrants, 1,000, and many indigenous people have been settled in the state. There are, with all this, we have new fluxes of immigrants, with Amazon being an open door for people entering into the country. With the pandemic, we have received many immigrants which have settled near the border with Peru, including our capital, Rio Branco, have hosted the CISB Norte, organized by ABIN, to debate the dynamic of this immigrant flux. Public security works together with operations in inland and in rivers, with a report delivered by the intelligence of the state, together with the federal police, the state police, also the road police, public ministry, and the judiciary power. These different operations. All these topics will be covered in these days, which are very important. So I'd like to congratulate all the coordination of this event to highlight the role of the different associations on the acting of crime, against crime. So I'd like to highlight all the support of the public, of the government in these partnerships, the sharing of knowledge, so we can actually protect our country. This responsibility is from all of us, men and women of this country, but mainly those who are in power. I will repeat what I usually say. Strengthened institutions is a democratic state which is strengthened. Our military forces, together with the public services of the state, have all my respect, because they are doing work in partnership with all these other institutions. In gatherings like this, I'd like to invite you. So, the extreme north of Brazil, a state that have fought to be part of Brazil. We have a very large border, and we also need support to carry out other actions. And I hope our gathering have good results so we can take care of our country each time better. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. I'd like to pass the floor to the President of IREE, Walfrido Warde. My friends, good morning. Or to my speech, bring some of my reflections to you. I'd like to thank you all to believe in this event, in this initiative, and for being a person that have attracted all these honorable people today and tomorrow. I'd like to take the opportunity to greet all the authorities, but most of all, those here present which are looking this problem of the public security and combating for democracy. Being the public ministry, and Dr. Lincoln is one of the pioneers on this fight in Brazil, so I'd like to ask for a hand of applause. Police, we have here the next few days the director of the federal police, and also all two other directors, Mr. Diallo and Mr. Paulo, which I also ask you to a hand of applause. Representing the police in the military police, civil and municipal, which are indeed those who collect those experiences, sociological experiences, who are those who are in the field fighting. Mr. Mário Savuk is also here. A round of applause to him. Representatives of the executive, beyond, we have thinking the public security in Brazil as Mr. Minister of CGU, which has brought important words and announced a debate which I think is key, which is the debate of compliance and integrity against mafia with the contracts with the administrations. I'd like to greet Ms. Cátia Abreu, Senator. The legislative are producing new legislations and working to make these laws to overcome the knowledge of our country, which are submitted through a deep disarticulation of competencies, which doesn't allow us to tackle in an integrated way criminality, which is not local or regional, it's national and transnational, as it was brought by Raul Jungmann. And also to remind the governors, I'd like to greet all those here present, Dr. Governor Cameli and Caiado, which has been working hard in his state. I'd like to thank all those who have coordinated this event. I am the visible face of this coordination right now, but this would be impossible if it wasn't the work of Benedito Mariano. Please, a hand of applause. I highlighted the arrival of him. Thanks so much for being here. We all thank your presence and are waiting for your speech. I'd like to thank Minister Raul Jungmann for the work and the teachings together with Mr. Mariano. You both have been my teachers in this topic of public security and been honoring. And Mr. Serrano, but most of all, which is not the person who's not here, is Francisco Mendes. He made this all possible with his excellent team of IDP. In this international seminar, the main thing is the premises that mafias, when I talk mafias, from the specialist point of view, when we talk about mafia, everybody understands. We do this seminar from the premises that mafias are taking care of the Brazilian state. Some people believe in that, some others don't. I believe in this a lot. But we are all worried about the possibility of they taking over the country. And a possibility that comes, as I said, because of the distribution of an inadequate distribution of competences regarding public security. We have a disarticulation, the money-wise, people-wise, for the fight of the criminality or insecurity. But most of all, we have a huge difficulty because of these problems, constitutional problems, to create and to carry out a national public security policy in the context, as Mr. Jungmann said, which is ineffective, mainly because of this national distribution, which needs to be reviewed, but not only for that. From the point of view of the reasons why we nowadays fight against organizations which are each time stronger and are inside of the state, there are many factors. But for me, it seems that one is deeply prevalent, which is the one that regarding the political reasons why they infiltrate politics, and it's because of the lack of rationality in the public development in Brazil. We have banned a judgment for the financing campaigns, electoral campaigns through private people. And in the other day, we substituted these companies for criminal organizations. And we have noticed that these organizations are organized nowadays as companies, so they can be hired by the public sector, putting agents inside, coordinators of expenses, and it is being favorable to them. And it's extremely urgent for us to do a revision of our campaign.
I know this is a controversial topic, but this and other controversial topics will be debated. There is no consensus when it comes to public security. What must occur is the convergence between the various Brazilian political actors on the left, in the center, and on the right, as you can see in our program. The left, center, and right are well represented here in this seminar, and there must be convergence in the search for solutions that all of us can accept. Solutions that are effective and that spare the Brazilian people who suffer from the wounds of violence, and a solution that uh, pushes away the suffering of our poorest communities here in Brazil. This is our fault. We have the duty to change that every day. Every day we must work in that direction. This is our humble contribution to this work to revert the state of insecurity in which we live today. I'd like to thank all of you. I could spend all day talking here. I do want to, but I'm sure you want to listen to all of our brilliant speakers who are going to be here over these couple of days. So thank you very much. A strong welcome of you. Your contributions and your presence is a blessing that you all give to the country of Brazil. Thank you very much, Mr. Walfrido, who is the coordinator of this seminar. We'd also like to thank the Honorable President of the Controllership General of Brazil, Dr. Dantas. Bruno Dantas is Secretary General of the Brazilian Institution of the Constitutional Studies, also a board member of the CNJ and CMMP. He is a doctor and master in law from PUC São Paulo. A big round of applause for him, please. We will give you the floor in just a second, please, Mr. President. Good morning. Mr. Gilmar, for me, it's always a pleasure to come back here to the IDP. This was my home for over 20 years practicing law, and to come here to this auditorium and see so many friendly faces, Governor Caiado, Abreu, Araújo, and so many others, it really shows us that it was possible. We were able to create a major center of excellence in teaching here in Brasilia. When I got here in 1998, I studied way in the Catholic University in Itaguatinga, evidently because we didn't have the IDP at the time. But when I look around and see the campus here in the southern wing and here, when I see this amount of students and people interested in discussing ideas and sharing knowledge. We have the perfect sense that this effort was worth it. Everything was worth it. It was extremely useful and is being extremely beneficial for Brasilia to have not just a center of teaching, but a true think tank for major national discussions, as we see here today, this important seminar on security. I'd like to greet Mr. Warde as well, and Ministers Carvalho, Governor Cameli. I have greeted some of the people here in the first row, but I would like to extend my regards to everyone, of course. It's a huge pleasure and honor to be here with you, Senator Katia, who is a dear friend of mine. It was said that this seminar was really going to conjugate force and intelligence. And I said, well, if I can't bring my intelligence, maybe I can bring at least some strength. And in the sense of the Controllership General of Brazil, Walfrido and I have run some audits. And this is the type of inspection that people, especially people in the field of law, are pretty accustomed. When we talk about audits, we usually think about conformity audits, which is the cases where we look for errors and for those responsible, especially with their CPF numbers as well. But in operational audits, that's not the case. The TCU, the Federal Court of in 88, became tasked with running these audits, which were already standard in Europe and in the US since 1970s. And operational audits are designed to organically observe public policies or the actions of a public body and identify whether that public policy is working as intended and to identify the opportunities to improve that public policy. With this, we can raise a non-punitive, non-sanctioning gaze so that we can help the public sector entities work better, so that public policies can be more effective and more efficient. This is a word I would like to highlight. Efficiency, my dear Secretary Sandra, a dear friend as well. Mr. Gilmar Mendes was part of this because it was certainly created by him, at least an important part of what was formalized way back in 1998, Mr. Gilmar. And 10 years after the initial text of that constitution was published, where 4 major principles had been classed as essential: legality, impersonality, and more. In that constitution, we also included efficiency. And when we talk about public security, as someone who has the privilege of listening to Minister Lewandowski about the need to build a single public security system, and on the other hand, Governor Caiado, whose perspective values the skills and the competencies of the state, we see that actually all of us are right. And we need to, very much like Aristotle, find the virtue, neither too far to one side nor to the other. Of course, the states need to have the competencies to organize their police forces, and the states are the places where violence is really felt because the federal government, federal level is a fiction really that we create. Of course, the federal government is important. They have important competencies. They legislate on a number of topics, such as criminal law. But without a doubt, the day-to-day lives of the police forces cannot be managed from an air-conditioned office in Brasilia. We must understand that violence is a phenomenon that is felt by each and every citizen very intensely. And those managers who live closer to those citizens have the optimal conditions to see the real problems and to design solutions that can actually be useful. Of course, this does not mean de-articulation, disorganization. And here is the point where I would like to focus my words here. All operational audits, all of the work that the Federal Court of Audit handles in terms of security, they all reach very similar conclusions. The de-articulation that occurs within the public security system is perhaps the greatest responsible agent for the startling, really dreadful situation we see today. The other day, I was at an event in Sao Paulo with Governor Caiado, and a journalist asked me, if you were president of Brazil, what would be your priority? One, two, and three. I said, one, security, two, security, three, security. Because without security, our children cannot go to school. Without security, the public power cannot install healthcare units in any community. In Rio de Janeiro, if you don't have an agreement with the organized crime, not even physicians can go up into the favelas. So, what are we actually talking about? Are we going to continue to pretend that we live in a romanticized period where crime was utterly disorganized, and so the disorganization of our federal government was not as influential? Well, today, crime is highly organized. I was talking to this with Minister Costa. The posture between the biggest criminal factions in Brazil, the Red Command, who is a faction that is occupying territory, they're violent by definition, and the PCC, the First Capital Command, is a corporate faction. What they want to do is to reduce explicit violence so that their criminal business can flourish and suffer fewer attacks from the state. So for our public men and women, the diagnostic needs to begin. And I thank Mr. Ricardo Lewandowski because few times have I seen in Brazil someone with the experience that he has between the three powers, from the top of all his authority as the emeritus minister of the Supreme Federal Court, to actually sit down with the governors and have a sincere discussion to structure and organize the basis for a dialogue between all levels of the country, but we can leave this condition that often seems like a dead end. As we see in Rio de Janeiro, it even makes us want to give up sometimes because we don't even know where to start. And is this hurts because it means that we are failing as authorities. So, unfortunately, I missed Minister Lewandowski's speech, but I have a lot of faith in the actions of our Minister of Public Security and in the capacity and good sense of our state governors to build, and if need be, an amendment to our constitution so that above all, we can assign public resources to create a coordinated action between the federal and state governments. I won't even include the cities because today every city wants to create their own guard, city municipal guard, and they used to be unarmed, but now they're starting to become armed. So we see everyone running to try to save themselves. And the big truth is that you cannot save yourself individually. from a problem this size. Either we all save ourselves collectively or we all fail collectively. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Well, we'd like to thank all of you gentlemen for your amazing contributions. We'd like to thank you, please, to return to your seats. We will now begin with the first session in this seminar. Our official photograph first. In just a few moments, we'll begin the first session in this seminar.
Let's continue. In the first panel, we have the topic, a plan of combat criminal organizations operating in Brazil. I invite to come to the stage for this panel, the first one in the seminar, the Honorable Governor Ronaldo Caiado. Ronaldo Caiado is the first elected governor and re-elected in the first round in Goiás. He has come from UFFJ. He was a third of the Brazil. Also like to invite our Honorable Mr. Mário Sarrubbo, National Secretary of Public Security and former Attorney General of Justice of Criminal Politics and Institutional Politics. He was president of the College of Procurement of Justice. I'd like to invite into also the former Minister of Defense and Public Security, Mr. Raul Jungmann. Welcome. Mr. Raul Jungmann is a president of IREE Defense and Security. He was Minister of the Reform and of Public Security. He was a head of INCRA and State Deputy for 3 terms. Together with us, remotely, the former Minister of Justice, Mr. Tarso Genro. He is Honorable President of IREE. He is a lawyer and writer on work law, labor law. He was Minister of Justice. He was mayor of Porto Alegre City and governor of the South State of Rio Grande do Sul, and also federal deputy. And as a moderator, again, Mr. Walfrido Warde, president of IREE. Mr. Walfrido, so the floor will be yours to, okay, the floor is yours. So let's start. If you allow me, I'd like to talk with our honorable secretary, telling us what the federal government plans for the countries in the matter of public security. Mr. Sarrubbo, please. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank my dear friend, Walfrido, Warde, for giving me the opportunity to participate on this event. I'd like to greet the governor of Goiás, Mr. Ronaldo Caiado, Mr. former Minister Raul Jungmann. I was invited together with this participant. I'd like to greet everyone that are here with us, and also on Mr. Tarso Genro. It's a challenge to talk about public security in Brazil nowadays. Brazil is, and as well as Latin America, a very complex society. We live in a very complex society with a lot of social inequalities, which ended up being an area for crime and for organized crime. The organized crime started structuring themselves and has as a feature, as you all know, the adaptation of the advancement of society. It starts in late 80s, about 20, 30 years ago, working mainly with drug trafficking and understanding that if they were able to organize themselves at some point, if they understood that they could be together, unified, they would be able to get protection, live better inside of prisonal system, and more than that, they understood that they would be able to make fortunes with it. And then it was created a huge CEOs of organized crime. I usually say that many of these faction leaders, if they were because they are, no shadow of a doubt, with a great vision of the market. From this standpoint, organized crime started to understand the possibility of growth, the possibility of making fortunes, and more than that, the possibility to structure themselves as a big organization, as a big crime industry, as well as protecting those who are together with them in these projects. Criminality in Brazil nowadays is, before everything else, a human rights issue. As it was said to Mr. Walfrido at the beginning, Mr. Gilmar, Mr. Bruno Dantas, today, we, common citizens, cannot go out on the streets on the fear of being robbed and so on. But we have to go a little beyond this context, more than those and the middle class, different neighborhoods in Brazil. Those who suffer most with criminality are, for sure, the most vulnerable. Those who live in the outskirts of big cities that arrive later home. Yesterday or today, someone contacted me and said on the importance of looking into women who work till late and they arrive at home late, they are robbed. Many times they lose their mobile phones, which are paid in installments. So this context shows us that this challenge, and as I say, people come to me and say, congratulations, this is a very important mission. And some mothers come and say, oh, I'm really sorry about that context that you work in. We have two axes that worry Minister Lewandowski and obviously the Secretary of Public Security. We have the organized crime and urban violence. We need to change this security sensation we have. I could speak for over an hour the indexes in Brazil, the numbers of crime in Brazil, but some other days I met a Minister Haddad. We need to work to improve economy and reduce inequalities. In this context, with Mr. Lewandowski, working with him, we need to improve the sensation of security and deliver some answers to the organized crime problem. I believe in this issue, there's no way to see these big victorious companies if we, inside of the public ministry, and I'd like to greet my friend and a reference in the combat against crime in Brazil and in the world, as he has worked for, I was able to understand how his name is referenced. Is a friend that I usually talk daily almost to understand the problems with Lincoln Garcia. When we talk about organized crime, we have to look together with the traditional vision that we have in the public ministry from the vision of Lincoln and other colleagues that it has to be fought in three main areas. The first one is the activities in general, drug traffics, scams, people, and many other activities of this big company. Another one, it was also highlighted for a colleague, is the corruption of the public agents. There's no way to talk about organized crime without fighting the corruptions of the public servants, police officers, and executive offices. Corruption is all usually associated to organized crime. And finally, money laundering. I believe that this is the best way and maybe the biggest action that can be done to unbalance these organized crime organizations. And this can only happen if us, together with other authorities, especially in Amazonia, which is such a complicated area. The Amazonic region nowadays answers for a high percentage of the organized crime in Brazil and Latin America, is one of the main axes and priorities. It's one of the priorities of the federal government nowadays. And I told them, if we, and I was talking to the federal public ministry, if we don't look into it closely and work in a way that's absolutely integrated, it means that it's obvious. If the state don't organize themselves, if the state forces don't organize themselves, we will not be able to reach and fight organized crime in these three main topics. So it's needed that the state, the federal justice, and everybody sitting together in the same table to take care and treat this intelligence information in a professional way without barriers. Lincoln knows what I'm talking about. I've came to Brazil with him many times to talk with authorities, bring financial fluxes, bring all that we had in São Paulo of intel, of criminal organizations, especially those ones working in São Paulo. And mainly, I'm talking about the organizations and offices, sometimes the flow of information is not promoted, and that's difficult our work. So we have started working in an organism, and Brazil is structured for that. We need to give applause to SUSP. It's an amazing idea. Is Brazil in the avant-garde of public security, and this is very well established. Mr. Alfredo has mentioned before the union today. If we think about SUSP, the union is absolutely shrunk in the formulation of these public policies. A journalist once said in the morning news shows, the ministry did a suggestion, and then she said, this not a law. Nobody has to comply with these aspects of the cameras in the officer's uniform. The thing is, the main mechanism that we have nowadays to influence and, let's say, foment good public policies from the federal government, from the Ministry of Justice and SENASP, is the Fund of Public Security. What will happen with the cameras in the officers' uniforms? It will be available for the officers, for the state, if the protocols are adopted through the law.
And I am very firmly certain that the vast majority of states would validate our project. For instance, Sao Paulo. And so this policy will be promoted and disseminated, but it's still too little. The federal government and Minister Lewandowski is designing this, and at some point he is going to write a dispatch. We, Senator Katia, we need to have the courage to bring this topic to the federal Congress in a very difficult political time, but we need to bring this debate to allow the federal government to have a role and influence and establish national guidelines on topics that are structural for public security without, of course, affecting what Minister Lewandowski said on the topic of public security. But the SUSP needs to be constitutionalized, and the federal government needs to effectively handle and create structural guidelines for public security. But specifically on the topic of organized crime, and I know I'm almost at the end of my time here, I've been told we are creating and designing at the SENASP, the National Secretary of Public Security, with Minister Ricardo Lewandowski, that, listen, Walfrido, Brazil has countless centers of intelligence across different regions. The information is there. The states work very effectively to produce it. But the truth is that we need to channel this information, and we need to sit at the table at the same level, all of us, all of the agencies. And what we need to do is, at the Ministry of Justice, we need to create, with SENASP, but always equally, we need to all sit around a large table, and with all the different police forces, federal police, state police, military police, the COAF, because if we want to talk about money laundering, the COAF needs to be stronger, because it's the only way for us to identify suspicious transactions. And we need to work with intelligence, which is the Ministry of Articulation at SENASP, with the police forces in the different states to fight organized crime. We need to organize intelligence between all the different institutions with something that is essential, that I've been saying for the federal police, for all police forces, for our secretaries, our Secretary of Security who's here. We need trust to be shared between the different institutions. We need to have the opportunity to exchange information, and from that point, organize and structure plans that can destructure, that can destroy these organized crime organizations. And they have actually taken ownership of some territories. The federal government has a very interesting program. It's not ours, it already existed. It's called Convive. It's a project that considers that thinks about these territories that today are dominated by organized crime, and it will install centers of citizenship, which is what we need, citizenship and civic enfranchisement. We need to do what organized crime currently does today, which is bring citizenship services. And used to say this to our GAECOs in Sao Paulo. There's no point in organizing a GAECO action somewhere to seize drugs and leave because the next drug dealer will move in. No, the state needs to follow us. And that's why I'm such a staunch believer in the Convive project with a public security project, because it will take back those territories for the state. It will take those territories away from the drug traffickers. So I think that if we associate our projects and our police actions with Convive, we will take back these territories and change this reality. We truly believe in body cams. Actually, I cannot imagine why anyone would be opposed to body cams for our police forces. They protect good officers, they reduce death of officers, they reduce police lethality, they improve the efficiency of police work. The numbers are very clear. And in addition, they are considered evidence because the images go to the judiciary and they will improve our security thereby. And lastly, one of the final aspects we're looking at, the health of our police forces. Escuta Suspi is very important there. We have a large number of civil and military police agents who are on leave for healthcare related reasons. So Escuta Suspi is going to be important there. But we also believe in something that is very, very old now, but it needs to be rebirthed, which is community policing. They are tasked with preventing conflict much more so than inhibiting or fighting crime. I know my time is almost up and I need to give the floor back to some specialists, but generally speaking, this is what we are thinking about today. This is what Minister Ricardo Lewandowski talked about. And our mission is to bring this to fruition through this assessment. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sarrubbo. Thank you for your words. Before we pass the floor on to Governor Caiado, I'd like to acknowledge the illustrious presence of Mr. Jorge Messias, our illustrious guest and minister. Minister Messias was going to give initial remarks, but we got him to speak a little bit more than that. So here's what we'll do. Governor Caiado first, then Minister Messias, because we know he has another commitment. Then Minister Tarso Genro, who is in Rio Grande do Sul, will speak. And then the designers of the SUSP, Minister Raul Gonçalo, to give some final words. So Governor Caiado, the floor is yours, please. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to say that I have a long experience in many administrations. I'm now in my second time as the governor of my state, And I'd like to give my special thanks to Walfrido for being brave enough to put this topic up for discussion. I've never seen this or anything like it in Brazil. People are always fearful when we discuss this topic. This topic has been hidden from population, and you have now brought many people here to talk about this. I have experience in the parliament. You you build. No one is the owner of the truth. You build partnerships. As you know, if you don't know me, I'm also a surgeon. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. So when I see a patient with multiple fractures, I need to very quickly come in and solve problems. So as my old professor used to say, listen, son, some theoreticians can talk about healthcare on paper. Doing surgery on paper is amazing. There's no contamination, there's no ICU, there's no negative developments, there's no death. So on paper, surgery on paper is amazing when it's written down. But when you actually go to the operating room to do your surgery, then you see all the challenges, all the hardships. And that's the fact that I would like to bring here, because with the experience I have today, after being 6 years as the leader of the state of Goiás, to give you a brief idea, among the 10 more most violent cities in Brazil, four are Louisiana, Valparaiso, and two others are all in the state of Goiás. People did not commute. People had to sell drugs. Kids had to sell drugs during recess. And the professors, the teachers who got in their way were murdered. If you had a shop, you needed to pay your monthly fee. And that is no different from every other country, every other city in the country, pardon. Now, when I took over the government, the state could not afford to buy a single diesel-powered car because uh, no bank would finance that car, and people didn't want to have cars because they would be stolen. There was no security whatsoever. People couldn't live in their own rural properties because the organized crimes are diversified. They're specialized. Some steal cargo, some steal fuel, some steal rural properties, some steal banks, some kidnap whole cities. So they pulverize their actions into many different fronts. They are truly dedicated, and they know that in the complete lack of a public security policy in the country, they have an open field to work in. Today, no one discusses the Amazon anymore. It's finished. That's done. Where is the federal policy in the Amazon? It's been dominated by drug traffickers. Today, all of the wood smuggling is done by the drug traffickers. All of the illegal farming is handled by the drug traffickers. That is our reality. General Vilas Boas, when he was senator of Brazil, he said, Caiado, I know the Amazon. And to this day, we still have not yet refined cocaine. Well, today it does exist. The reality today is that we are no longer just a route for this drug. We actually produce this drug. And why? Because we're sophisticated. The healthcare units to support hospitals, the vast majority of them are paying these drug traffickers because uh, they have no trouble paying for ether with which they refine cocaine. Today they invade the space taken up by entrepreneurs, and Walfrido, entrepreneurs should pay you a tribute because today the drug traffickers own gas stations. Drug traffickers come in and say, how much do you want for your gas station? And you say, no, I don't want to sell it. No, I'm not asking if you want to sell it. It's already mine. I'm just asking you how much you want. This is what life is like. So either we can sit here and map out something that is not a reality, or we can discuss an X-ray that is not the truth of the citizens who live in regions commanded by the drug traffickers who left their habitats. And today they invade the lives of people, entrepreneurs, of communities, of the day to day, whether that's a gas station or urban transportation or in the more sophisticated crimes that today use AI to hack into people's accounts. Regardless, today they have a monopoly. Just to give an idea, in my city, Goiânia, on average, 34 cars were stolen every day. Car dismantling in Goiânia actually produced more cars than Caoa and Mitsubishi together in the state. And what about the owners? They live in Alphaville, in a very expansive upscale neighborhood, and they would say, well, why should I face those people? I'm a businessman. If the state is cowering before the crime, that's the bitter truth. If the state cowers in the face of crime, why will citizens face crime? So that's the result of increasing expansion. And we are playing with this. But in September of 23, Marques, former president of Argentina, held a conference in Buenos Aires, as I mentioned with Walfrido, and he invited all the former presidents of Latin America. And they all said, no, we don't have they don't have intermediaries. No, they are in charge of the country. And now in this municipal election, all the richest cities are going to be financed by drug traffickers. They want two things, the garbage trucks and the Department of the Revenue. This has been negotiated. And then we have this thesis, oh, maybe, perhaps. No, that's the reality. It's life as it is. Just to give you an idea, when I took power of the government, I made some arrests along with our federal police, and I'd like to thank the superintendent, Marcela of the state of Goiás police. She put together a structure that provides services to people who want to work, intelligence departments within her office. They are my military intelligence officers, my civil intelligence officers. They are headed by the state of Goiás.
Articulations happen. So this makes that we are able to act immediately. We are not avoiding crime. Nowadays, the criminals change professions or change stage. In Goiás, there's no space for criminals. There's no space of land in Goiás which is commanded by the narco trafficking. Now I ask you, present, where is democratic state? The Constitution, I ask Mr. Sarrubbo. Constitution shows the crime state and the state of law. So what's the state in totality? It's about 3-5%. The rest of the country is commanded by the trafficking. Oh, citizens cannot go into that road, that neighborhood. The citizen cannot be entrepreneur because they don't have tax reduction. So what happens is that the trafficker comes to my door and they say, oh, you can close the doors, you're not going to work today because there was a problem in the neighborhood. And the militian go there, you also say, okay, you can close your business today. So we need a motivation. We need support. And we and these people, they have to receive support. because they cannot do anything. What point are we getting at in this country? What is this? Citizens say, Mr. Caiado, I have a very simple mobile phone, because if I have an iPhone, they ask me to do Pix to them. I cannot live like this anymore. So there are two aspects of the market that didn't work in the market. Car protections and public security also had, all these two aspects have broke companies, and because this is what people were obligated to do. If I was re-elected, it was exactly because of the regions around Brasilia, which I had over 70% of the votes, because the common citizens, they want to be able to go to the bus stop without being attacked or robbed. Their mobiles, their money. All ladies want to go to the squares with their family. That's what we need to understand on the reality of the citizens. Once a lady told me, Governor, it's funny, when a bank is robbed, you is broadcasted to all countries, but I've spent all my life, I retired, and my everything was robbed from me because I spent 3 days outside of my home on holiday. And I'll ask you, who's going to pay for that? So we need to understand that the lack of security affects people's lives, their properties, the, the, the way that they can face difficulties. That's how we should look into it. So nowadays we have a state where if we talk on the phone or talk or walk at night on the streets or live anywhere on the stage. Now we can do all of that. We haven't had any new bank robbery in my state. There was 12 tries, but none of them were accomplished. We don't have kidnaps anymore, and many other aspects. So, and what does that mean? That our police is integrated. This means a police force working with freedom to act. That's what I mean. Because the power of the traffic organization is very, very high. Jungmann, when was a minister, once I was at his office, and he brought me a notebook, and he showed, look, Mr. Caiado, each of these trafficking organizations have dozens of lawyers. Do you think that this is easy? Where's the government policy to create, to build prisons? There isn't any. Fund for security? This is not existent. No governor can get rich of this money. Now, for me, why the crime has dropped in my state? Because I said criminals have to be in jail. Rapers, criminals, they are not allowed to have visitors in the jail. There are many things that I made law in the state, and that's it. I separate different factions. I isolated different commands. Criminality went straight down, because that's where, inside of the jails, that's the crime officers. Before, there were big images showing rents of rooms inside of prisons, cocaine, barbecues, prostitution. We used to see all that. And in that moment, you don't see any more mobilization of the women inside of the prisons. We don't see any request for the Justice Council. That's beautiful. Nobody does anything. So when you work, for sure, my friend, we have all organizations looking and following up. There's a human rights organization in São Paulo, which is banked by the narco traffic. What's the name of that one? I don't remember, but they were inside of this action. Yeah, so they made a lawsuit against me because I forbid visitors for these kinds of criminals, and that was a decision of mine in Goiás. So all this is very well articulated. They are powerful inside of the judiciary. They are powerful together with the politicians. They are powerful in many areas of the government. This is a reality. If you jail, for example, narco traffic, helicopters, airplanes, who transport body parts are from the narco traffics. And it's very difficult to find these people. What do the judiciary say? Say, I'm sorry. So, yeah, so we have many different problems to carry out processes against the traffic organizations. Deviations that do the trafficking, all of them are big companies that we have. Everybody knows. But there's someone that says it's the one responsible, so nobody finds the real traffickers. So you can understand how organized they are. So I'd like to make it clear for you, with all due respect to the secretary, Mr. Sarrubbo, in Goiás, I'm not going to put body camera. I will not do it. Who needs to have camera are those who are exactly in that system, okay, where they use surveillance, that they are able to not use it properly. I'm going to put camera to these people that need to be surveilled. And inside of jails, I will work on making our policy force being very effective, so they do not allow that the citizens and police officers don't do anything wrong. 59% of the Brazilian population says one thing. The main problems they say in the country is violence and drug trafficking. 59% is the first time that violence got into a margin of almost 60%. What's the government policy? I'll bring cameras. And then I say, look, I'm talking about drug trafficking. I'm talking about an organization that has more men than the forces of security in Brazil. They are armed much stronger than our own security forces. We are talking about something that's putting in risk the economy of the country and the lives of the people. And then we try to bring the topic to say, oh, the problem is not the narco traffic, it's the police force. Oh God, what's the logic of all that? We need to deal with the crime, not the policy officers. That's why things are as they are. So this is something that I'm really sorry. I might have some limitation because I am not able to understand this logic, whereas the body camera in an officer is the factor that will prevent the drug traffickers to act. That's all the opposite, sorry. We have the police officer saying, oh, will I build proofs against me? we might not work. So again, in my state, there's no body camera. We have an office that works properly, and they know when they go out in the street, they go to solve problems and protect the population. That's so true that nowadays Goiás is referenced in the country because people are completely free in our state. And I'm not talking about theory. I'm not drawing stories. I am bringing to you a reality that has been implemented in our state with the result that allows me to say that, well, they bring results that the population approve these policies. So to the governors, I believe that they should be able to talk with its population. So the federal government don't remove things that the state could do and are punished and impelled not to act. So I believe that is the reality, that it should be a reality. I would like also to say that I'm very glad to meet nowadays the promoter, Lincoln Garcia. You deserve some words from our state for the courage you have. That's what the Brazil needs. So we need to continue and free our country from crime. Well, have a good day, all of you. And once again, thanks for the space. I received here a paper, Angels of Freedom. Is an ONG from São Paulo, which are administrated by the PCC organization. Yeah, so they came against me with a lawsuit in the Supreme Court of Brazil. This is the reality of Brazil. Thank you. Have a good day. Now I'll pass the floor to the Minister, Jorge Messias. But even if we extend it a bit, it's important that we have a debate here, because all of you have seen opposing views on projects and public security. Here we have two opinions and two that are prevalent, and we have to debate that. This is the space, this is the moment. So I'd like to pass the floor to Minister Jorge Messias, which is without mic, but so I'm going to give mine to him. Good morning to everyone. It's a huge satisfaction to be here in this so important seminar. I'd like to greet someone that I have very dear to my heart and a lot of admiration, Senator Katia Abreu. So it's great to see you here. You're one of the organizers. I'd like to thank my colleagues for the government, for your speeches, the governor of Goiás, Ronaldo Caiado. Huge greeting to everyone, and the public security colleague, Mr. Sandro Avelar, is very competent and have my admiration. I'll be very brief. I arrived here late, and I'm very late for another commitment, but I'd like to greet for your initiative and your courage, as Mr. Governor Caiado said, to host a debate which is so important for the Brazilian society.
We need to find a way to discuss a topic of this scope with the care that it needs to be handled. And that place is the academic environment. It's through science, it's through universities, through serious and informed debate that we as a society in Brazil are going to be able to come to conclusions. Because that is what we are dealing with here, and that's what society expects of us, so that we can, through the different and various visions, arrive at a civilized conclusion for Brazilian society. In a topic that discusses public security, human rights, and democracy, we are bringing actors and agents with deep experience as we have here today, and whose visions are not necessarily the same. They are different. But I'm confident that everyone here is strongly committed to this greater purpose, which is public security. This is an extraordinary gain for our society. And on the topic, I hope I'm not stealing anyone's thunder here, because uh, irritating a Ministry of Security is not a good idea. But I would like to talk about democracy. And I think I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think I can contribute, even if at a small amount. I need to say that society, at least over the past 250 years, has advanced in extraordinary leaps in our civilization after the formation of the so-called modern state. And the formation of the modern state took place as a result of a social contract, I need to add, because our society, when it started having at hand this institution that, along with the markets and science, brought a great deal of advance and prosperity to our civilization. The state now has two roles that are of the utmost importance. The first is the power to tax, and the second is the exclusive use of force. And here is the central point of my speech. But when society gives the state exclusive use of force, largely attributed to the state, a central element that is a pillar to support our democracy, which is confidence, trust. And confidence is necessary in order for society to maintain high levels of democracy. In our country, this is a sensitive topic. Evidently, we cannot deny that Brazilian society has been experiencing worrying levels in the field of public security. Well, when we talk about public security and correlate that with the topic of democracy, we have two aspects that are essential, that are pivotal. First is the inefficiency of the state. And second, as Secretary Sarrubbo said, the feeling of lack of security that society senses and pressures the state to correct. So my point is very simple. When we see that society sees the state as being inefficient, and the feeling of lack of security invades people's homes, the perception of society, we have a deficit in confidence in democracy and in the very state. Therefore, the commitment of the public sector, regardless of which government, we're talking about the Brazilian state, we must work efficiently in order for Brazilian society to see public security. These are essential topics for democracy itself to survive. There are elements of extremist today. They are a topic that worries us, of course, but there's no point in limiting our discussion to this. As the public power, what we must do is to offer our society ways through which they can restore their confidence in the Brazilian state. That democracy depends on that. This is the real game, the real situation we need to tackle. And so all of the public power, and in Brazil we have this characteristic, in my opinion, it's very wise that we have the federal, state, and municipal governments cooperating in harmony to work on a topic of crucial importance, which is public security. And here we have Minister Lewandowski, and our secretary, obviously, of course, have mentioned this. They do effectively offer, as a federal government, the instruments, the technology, and the guidance necessary for states. And now it's true. The municipalities themselves, with the municipal guard service, so that all of us can advance and progress in this agenda, which is civilization. And so, thank you. I don't want to go over time here. I know that many of you have been supporting this agenda for a long time now, and I'm very pleased to know that this essential debate is being had today in the academic context, so that academic and policies can meet and have informed debate and promote science and promote a conclusion that I call a civilizational conclusion. Thank you again for the invitation, and I wish everyone all the best. Thank you, Mr. Messias. Your words were very precious and very important for us. Now, Minister Tarso General, can you hear us? Yes, perfectly. Yes, we hear you loud and clear. I would like to give you a very warm virtual hug. Thank you, Walfrido. All the best to you too. I'm very thrilled, but also very sad to participate in this event. I'm very happy because we have many very qualified people to debate this topic of such importance, and all the comments that have been made so far. I'm sad, however, because I couldn't leave my city because of a crisis, a climate emergency crisis here in my state that has caused a lot of hardship and a lot of suffering, especially in the more disenfranchised populations who who live outside of the center. And it's made us think about the future of the city and the question of public security and the question of combating organized crime puts us again at this level. I would like to greet my colleague, my friend Raul Jungmann, Governor Caiado, for your very clear words, Dr. Mario Sarrubbo, who has extraordinarily important responsibilities here in the country. I give you all my best, all my respect, and my utmost consideration. The Barometer publication published the results of a study in Europe last week. They're beginning a number of electoral processes on the topic of what were the most important concerns in their communities for the European people, the land of democratic revolutions, of the major transformations that are linked to human rights, and to the security of the state as a democracy that we all opted to choose here in Brazil. And this study reached the conclusion that the two major concerns of the European people today are not linked to poverty or to hunger or to climate or to social exclusion. The two issues that most concern the European people are war and insecurity. And war and insecurity are inextricably linked. They coexist in the same geopolitical space, in the same psychology of the masses, and they share and they take part in the day-to-day of all social classes. And so I started wondering, what could I say to help promote this reflection that brings us directly to a plan to combat organized crime. This debate is part of the public security issue and not public security itself. So I will try to quickly explain. I need to respect the time of all the other panelists as well, also prepared to speak. So I will be on time. But there are different levels of debate today, not just to answer right now what specific plan we have to fight organized crime. Now, whether we're going to simplify or not, if we simplify, we'll quickly reach some conclusions which can be correct or incorrect. But in a seminar like this one, I think it's very important for us to indicate what the different levels are as they connect to create this feeling of insecurity that exists all around the world, in Europe, Africa, Latin America, Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul, everywhere. It is linked to the issue of public security, but there are also other factors that work together to create this feeling of insecurity, which is a feeling that is caused by a reality, a critical reality, I might add. And so I propose to establish some ground assumptions that we need to debate and dive into so that we can arrive at a real concrete plan to fight criminal organizations, which, as I say, are part of the internal public security question. But internal public security is no longer internal. It's public security that is linked to regional factors, global factors, factors that interconnect at different levels. And as I can demonstrate in my brief talk here, I hope to contribute to our discussion. First, we need to see that insecurity today is the central aspect of politics, whether as a result of war, social problems, the increase in criminality, or organized crime. It takes place in politics, in the economy, in regional relationships, and in the process of globalization, too, which today is a story of flows. What are these flows? They are flows of information in the context of fake news, even to flows of manipulation, trying to invade or hack people online, to put it simply, cultural flows and political flows that are spread through a dominant manner around the world. There are two levels: the globalized economy that is legalized and the globalized economy that is underground. And on those, crime is spread, cultures integrate, and they generate relationships in this underground that are not controlled by the state. And they time and again leave the underground and rise up to the surface, and then from the surface dive back down underground. In other words, global financial flows, the legal ones, are important integrators, but under those flows, there are other flows that are not known. They are manipulated by international gangs. They enter the legal world and they leave the legal world into the illegal world through politics. And it's often causing despair in police forces. And so that brings us to our first problem. Today, the leaders who relate with internal public security, it's no longer just internal, but it is still largely internal, are linked to the concept of national security, of state security, and continental security.
So what is continental security? It's not the same from the 80s or 90s when There were revolutionary organizations in Latin America, and I'm reporting to our territory where the political action of some groups to fight with the state of democratic shaked. So the structure was made from a vision of national security, from the criteria of that we had at that one point in time for the country, the national states, being them democratics or national states which are dictatorial, as we had in Latin America. And we want to retake this experience here in Brazil. So what I say is that for a good combat, a systemic one against these organized crime organizations, first of all, it's important for us to have, at least here in South America, a continental of security deal, one of military nature and police nature. Why? Integrate national states, the democratic states, the formal states inside of regime of collaboration in order to establish a sovereign and shared South America. I believe that without these grounds, for example, if you have territories, national territories in South America, Latin America, which don't share the ideals of this community, more concrete or less concrete, but democratically, it would be very hard for us to have a sovereign control of our territories if we don't share political and strategic actions in matter of defense, matter of sovereignty, and collaboration in the fight against organized crime, through which these financial flows, illegal or biodiversity trafficking, or the trafficking, people trafficking, or drug trafficking, or even the traffic of illegal resources, it will be really hard for the states to establish a control of their territories in an effective way. So my dream to start this talking about this issue is a deal, a continental deal for the democratic countries to defend the democratic state, the territory, and integral solidarity in Latin America. Why without this is impossible to think on an effective fight which would would act all states of Latin America, because if any of these states is still organized and with organized crimes in regions that the police cannot even go in, or we cannot act, we cannot think on the security of the state. And what is the security of the state? The international doctrine says a state is a secure state when the state is in conditions for institutions to fight against any problem, and the problems are terrorism, drug trafficking, climate change, people trafficking, and the leaking of its frontiers through the pirate financial system that nowadays are structuring one of the biggest fortunes that later are legalized and used. So the state security in Brazil is a security that still have many faults. We need to have a concept of state security so we are not surprised by a coup as happened in Brazil. and that our institutions, especially the judiciary power, that at that time didn't have ways to fight against it, to act against it. So continental security is state security, and those who constitute another vision of national security. For us to go down to the internal security with capability to establish our police forces, that they are well paid, they are qualified, and that is integrated with the population. They are not occupying forces, which are usually violent. This is also key because without solving these important issues, the parallel powers which are instituted from different organizations like in Amazonia and other big cities. Here in my state, there's no free territories. We have organized crimes in different aspects, different levels of society, from the highest ones to the lowest ones. But there's no free territory for crime. So we need to understand that this vision of national security needs to have three legs. One, that the internal enemy is not anymore political as in the 70s and 80s. The internal enemy is those who lick the borders and generate financial flows which are criminal, and also people and drugs, and establishing a communion of these organizations that created this fortune. So we need to have a conception of the national security of that. In second place, an harmony, integral harmony through the forces and the populations, which needs to be built through specific programs in each region, and which will not happen with the organizations of the force, the occupation of the force, I'm sorry. So we have put the police there and no control of the society. The police officers, then they have to be controlled by society because they represent the state. They are the force of the state. That's why they are important, and that's why they should be also protected through training, through programs, mental health programs, career plan, which would take them to different levels. And the society has to be organized to communicate with these police forces so they are not perceived as a strange force, to have them as present in that region to eliminate the other organizations, secondary organizations. In this way, would be able to communicate the relations of the everyday public security with the big issues of the cities in regional, continentals, and global. Because that young person who takes some drug and take to Ipanema Beach or another region, or even inside of its neighborhood, to take it to a user, it's just a link of a chain of the organized crimes. And this happens through these three levels, as said. There is continental insecurity, the insecurity to act as a state, and from a concept of national security that mix the need of repression of the crime with the need to enforce the people in a specific region. So there's no solitary way to fight against it. There's no way to do it alone. So to finish my intervention, I'd like to say that there is no more separation between the external and the internal. The territory control and the exercise of the territorial sovereignty to fight organized crime, the narco militias, and drug trafficking. It is integrated with the policies of public security is needed. There may be extreme actions happening, but this will not solve any problems, while the factors that englobes criminality are not together. We will not have a true public security for the citizens. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Minister Tasso Genro, for your precious contributions. Now, I'll pass the word for Minister Raul Jungmann for the final speech. We are 40 minutes late, and we are going to wait for the next lectures to come. So a big hand of applause to Minister Raul Jungmann. Good morning to all. I'd like to greet the members of this panel, the Secretary Mário, Sarrubbo. I don't know if you did a good change, Mr. Sarrubbo, because a SNASP is not a toy. I would like to greet the Governor, Ronaldo, Caiado, which was our colleagues in the Congress, in many different debates and discussions and advancements that we were able to do. I would like to leave Walfrido for the end. I would like to greet the Ministry of Defense for the Army and a Democrat, which is Fernando Azevedo, which I ask a hand of applause. Fernando, as I said to Caiado, represents what we idealize in a delegate, linked to the sovereignty of the country, linked to what the Republic says, and aligned with the democracy state. So that's why our reverence, Fernando. Greet Mr. João Paulo Cunha, President. It's an honor to be listened by you. Thank you very much for your presence. I'd like to greet Senator Katia Abreu, so elegant as usual. I'd like to, and also to greet the Security Ministry of the Federal District. I'd like to greet the politicians here present and everyone else. Walfrido, I'm gonna really leave you to the end, so I can give some nice words to you, and also because we are on time, well, I'll try to be quick. Some clarifications. Firstly, my intervention will be from this state capital with the capital S point of view, talking about the government. And after, I'd like to say that we don't have a national security system. It does not exist. We do not have, therefore, a national policy of public security. I'm not saying the past and the future in the past, so we're talking about the perspective of the state. And thirdly, which more the biggest problem, if we consider what we have as a system, which I don't consider it as a system, is functional to the organized crime. What we have today is functional, it's not, and not the opposite, combating these issues. And why do I say that? Because we've had 7 constitutions so far. Whoa, I'd like to greet Mr. Former Ministry of Justice and my friend, coordinator of a big program of public security PRONAS, is Mr. Tasso Genro. So as I was saying, we had the first constitution in 1824 and the second one in 1988. In none of them, public security was an attribution for the federal government and the central government, I'm saying the Republic and what came after. In all of them, what we call Brasilia, which in the past was Rio de Janeiro and before Salvador, had any competency and responsibility with public security.
And so it becomes easy to understand why, when we say that we don't have a system and we don't have a policy, we have plans, okay? We have plans. But the survival of the plan is precisely in the time and survivability of the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Security, which I was honored to have in 300 years of independence or 500 years as a colony. And so I like to joke that when President Temer sent the message to the National Congress, he said, extraordinary minister of public security. And when I went to the meeting with the ministries, I would greet my peers saying, hello, ordinaries. They didn't really like it, but the Congress quickly ended that name, and I became an ordinary minister as well, not an extraordinary one anymore. So the question is why? If we look around, we'll see that every one of these social policies, public policies in this country, began at some level in the federal government. Healthcare, welfare, social security, education, and everything else, including in the Constitution of 1988, all the fields, all the social fields, and I'm an admirer of yours, Milton, as well, all of them reached the highest levels of federal administration. That means that they are public ministries. And why did security, except for a 10-month period when I was a minister of public security, why did it not have that status at any other time? Well, what happens is there is simply no option to coordinate or enforce things from Brasilia, from the secretary who is there. To put this a different way, if some friend of ours sadly is held up or mugged, who is going to have the authority to solve this, criminally speaking? The state, the military police is state, the civil police is state, the attorney's office is state, and the justice is state. So where does the federal government come in? Or let's put it another way. Imagine that I'm a minister and I call up a secretary, a public security secretary at the state level, and I say, Mr. Secretary, starting from now, our priority is feminicide. And he'll say, okay, Mr. Minister, thank you. He hangs up and he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't owe me anything. I have absolutely none, zero, no leadership to enforce, to define guidelines, to coordinate anything, none. Absolutely zero. And this does not diminish Saru, but is it possible to fight a crime that is nationalized, transnationalized? The Economist 6 months ago wrote an article saying that the PCC was one of the largest criminal organizations in the world. That's from The Economist. Now, who is going to fight that? The state? Which state? No, this state does not exist. No state acting alone can establish a national public security policy, nor or a public security system. So what's the solution? Evidently, we have a flaw we must correct. Of course, we need to respect the authorities of our Constitution. This is one of the underlying clauses of our Constitution. But as things currently are, we have no chance. Let's look at some numbers. The police forces, municipal guards, civil, military, and criminal, and and uh, and jail forces, 150,000 men. You know how many people are in the federal and police? 20,000. You see the asymmetry? Now let's look at the prison system. Do you know how many prisons the states have? Approximately 1,400. Do you know how many the federal government has? 5. Let's keep moving forward. Let's find the truth in the budget. The total value that the states and cities spend is approximately 130 billion reals. These numbers come from 2022 in the Brazilian Public Security Forum. And I'd like to thank the civil society in behalf of Ronaldo Sergio. How much does the federal government spend? 25 billion. Folks, how can the federal government coordinate anything at all with this asymmetry in terms of personnel, budget, and prison system? Can you explain to me? And without any support from the Constitution? Can you explain that? Today we have 70 criminal factions, 71 according to some sources. The prison system is controlled by organized crime organizations that arose inside the prisons. We don't have the smallest chance of fighting these problems if we don't discuss the prison system, and no one discusses the prison system in Brazil. It's a taboo. Our society is completely cornered because we cannot pass an amendment that would cause the death penalty because our Constitution prohibits the death penalty. Now, listen, I am not defending the death penalty. I'm totally opposed to it. So let's remove them from the streets. I don't care where they're sent. Let's put them into a warehouse where 55% are youth. And who? They are black, they are mixed race, they are poor, they don't have a lot of income, their families are not well structured. And of course, their level of education is very low. In other words, our prison system is racist and anti-poor. Now, what percentage do I have to fight with the heads of the gangs, the PCC, the TPC, the crime family, all those criminal organizations? How many do I have in there? 5% at the most. So as Minister Alexandre Moraes says, we arrest a lot of people, but we arrest very poorly. We need to have clear rules for killers, rapists, for the heads of criminal organizations, the strong hand of the state. But for that, we need to have a lot more police intelligence, much more so than operations. Of course, the operations must exist, but without intelligence, we're not going to have any results. Without budgeting, we're not going to have results. We were lucky to approve the SUSP, the Single Public Security System. This began in the very first Lula administration, coordinated by our dear friend Mr. Moraes, and also by Mr. Cardoso, then Minister of Justice. And we approved the final version, of course, after lots of debate, and it went through Congress. It's an attempt to bridge the gap between federalism and the absolutely urgent need to coordinate that we must have at the federal level. Governor Caiado has shown us that he is being successful in this field, but was his state like this before? Can he ensure that his legacy will remain? At the same time, if I have success in one state, I have half a dozen other states that are dropping. On the contrary, the situation is worsening. I won't name any of these states. There may be representatives there. I like to say that I only like to criticize people behind their back because it's difficult to criticize people in front of them. So evidently, this system with the anti-drug law that we have, where we only see the growth. Now, I'm not proposing that we legalize drugs, but let's acknowledge that the anti-drug policy has failed. We need to recognize that. Let's recognize it. If you catch a young guy with a bit of marijuana or crack, well, he doesn't have any priors, he's not armed, and you toss him in a prison, you have just ended that young person's life. Is that what you want? Because 95% of the youth in there don't have any jobs, no employment activity. 90 some percent also don't have any education. So I'll ask you, okay, the prison system aims to sanction the person who committed crimes, but it also aims, and we cannot forget, that it aims to recover. It help their recovery. So where is that recovery? Where is it, João Paulo? We have the third largest criminal population in the world. The first is China, the second is the US, and we are number three. Something the order of 6 to 700,000. Now, this is very important. All the information about public security in Brazil comes from the states. The federal government does nothing but consolidate them. There are some good information, but there's also terrible information. Now, I'd like to ask all of you who are here in this international seminar. Actually, it's the largest international seminar on public security in the country, the largest one ever held. And I think in South America overall, because I've been to many of them. So I'll ask you, how can you run public policies without actual information? How can you do that? Let me ask you. So the federal government also doesn't have that jurisdiction. Many states have excellent statistics, and others, please forgive me, other states are very bad at their information collection. So how can you run public policy? We don't even know the number of prisoners that exist in Brazil. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me make one thing very clear. Insecurity and violence begins by destroying sociability. The Bible says, love your brother as you would love yourself. When you start looking at others and walking down the street, when you start failing to believe in living in society or in confidence, as our colleague Messias said, right after that, you will see the erosion of democracy itself. There is no chance to remain a democratic country, and that is perhaps the greatest threat. And to keep the accomplishment, this attainment that we had using the 1988 Constitution, if we do not tackle this problem, we don't have the least chance, because it erodes relationships, it destroys sociability in relationships, and it destroys democracy itself. And this is the challenge. So I'm going to talk about Walfrido. Please come up to the stage, Walfrido. Please. I want to talk to you. I want you close by. I'm not going to send anyone any videos. I just want to talk to you for a moment. I can say that because I am a friend of his. He's a wacky guy, but his sense of citizenship and civic duty and his love for the country makes him organize an event like this. He's already a great man, a great attorney, a great public figure, but he's so generous. His huge heart has made all of this possible, and he is giving Brazil a gift in this seminar. So that's why I'm so proud of him. That's why I wanted to say this to him up close. Wait. Please enjoy the seminar, enjoy this generosity, because Brazil will thank you. All the best to all of you. Take care. Well, that's it for now. I'm kidding, just wait. We're 1 hour behind, but we've got another session coming up. All right, thank you for your excellent contributions, all of you. I'd like to ask you to please stay behind, because in just a few moments we have our next session coming up. In just a few moments, our next session is beginning, which will discuss the topic of public security and human rights.
In some moments, we're going to have the next panel of this seminar. With the theme Public Security and Human Rights. Please, I'd like you to invite you to return to your seats so we can go to the next panel. I'd like to please ask you to return to your seats. Let's continue with our seminar with the panel that will debate the theme, public security and human rights. I'd like to invite to the stage to integrate this panel the Honorable Minister of Human Rights and Citizenship, Dr. Silvio Almeida. Silvio Almeida is a professor, attorney, and philosopher. He is a visiting professor of the Columbia University in the United States and researcher at the University Duke, also in the United States. He is the writer of Structural Racism and other works. Also, remotely, the former National Secretary of Public Security, Dr. Luiz Eduardo Soares. You can see him on the screen. Welcome, Dr. Luiz Eduardo Soares is anthropologist and is professor at FRJ and professor of Harvard, Columbia, Pittsburgh. He was subsecretary and coordinator of Justice and Security of the State of Rio de Janeiro and Secretary of Prevention of Violence in Porto Alegre and also Nova Iguaçu. To lead this panel, I'd like to invite Dr. Vicente Cândido. Welcome, Dr. Vicente, attorney specialized in tributes. He's founder of the PT Party and federal deputy. I'd like to wish you all a great panel. Good afternoon. I would like to highlight my joy to be here together with you with these reflections which are so needed for Brazil, also to register once again our big friend Warde, Gilmar Mendes, Minister. Brazil needs to look into these topics. We've had no discussions on these topics, and so I'm glad to choose this topic. It's hot topic. It's not common during election campaigns to find managers to do the campaigns. So this is another aspect to reflect in these 2 days and also in this small table, which is recommended for the end of the morning, our stomachs will try to regulate the size of our speakers, Mr. Eduardo and Silvio Almeida. So I think we'll not have to worry about telling them that because of the time that we have available. So first of all, Professor Eduardo, is that okay? Hello? Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Valcedro Warde for the invitation. I'd like to greet Dr. Vicente Cândido the audience, and especially Minister Silvio Almeida, which trajectory has been inspiring for many of us that fight for human rights, intellectual inspiration, and as a citizenship inspiration. I'm really sorry not to be attending it physically to listen to you, Minister, and also to listen all the colleagues and the colleagues in the audience. I hope that we have finally an opportunity to dialogue directly. I'd also like to greet two dear friends which might be in the audience, and its names I have to greet all the members of the audience, Renato Sérgio de Liba and Mr. Jean Durube. First, Renato, I'd recognize the importance of the Brazilian Forum of Public Security and all the entities in Brazil that research the problem of public security from a perspective of human rights, of preserving access and the guarantees of human rights. Also to greet Mr. Gruber for your biography, all your journey dedicated to human rights through successive battles adapting to different historical contexts. The theme is clear, I don't even have to say, it's extremely complex, and it would be needed to go well beyond to my competency and time that we have today. But maybe would be interesting to share basic agenda that would be useful for many, in which the consensus would establish the debate that will follow. An agenda and some arguments I'd like to bring, in which could help our discussions and the way to go. So I'll start with a specific point in honor of Silvio Almeida. Please, Minister, let me call you by the name because here I am evoking citizenship. Our attributes, which are common as human beings. Public security problematic in Brazil gets confused with the problematic of racism. I have learned a lot about racism studying the concept of the structural racism that Mr. Silvio Almeida has developed or elaborated, and I'd like to highlight a perspective that I've been taking throughout decades. The issue of public security is the issue of racism, which is the issue of a patriarchy, which permeates different social classes. The abysms that divides Brazil, the history of slavery and its consequences, and everything that we have inherited and or have built are not separable. And obviously, we also have to distinguish those phenomena, to analyze them and to reconstitute analytically its interrelations. So we have about 50,000 crimes, deaths by robbery. This is huge. There's no way to classify with adjectives, which shows the magnitude and extension of this tragedy. But a nation got used to with these scandals, in which I believe that those who pay with life the insanity of our collectivity is mainly the Black people. And I've been saying since the 80s, and it sounded like a rhetoric that exists a genocide in Brazil happening, a genocide which are victiming the youth of the Black people, especially in most vulnerable areas of the country. And as Black young people and poor people which die, most of those victims of these homicides are those poor Black people, young people. The country have naturalized this reality, and it tolerates its perpetuance. If this distribution of this was equitative and demographic, many governments would have fallen. Secretarism policies would have fallen. But we've been living with it. But this does not make, even if we co-live with it, because impunity is obviously the biggest problem, but homicide is still very high. So we could deduct from that Brazil is a country of impunity. That's not the case. We know that we have the third largest jail population in the world, and it's one of the grows the most since 2002, before El Salvador emerged with fascism. We started being the country with the highest growth in the prison system. And this happens because of the fact of a bias on the focus of the energy that we put in the public policies, and we are not able to prevent these dramatic situation that manifest in many homicides in such an absurd number. So we invest our energy in other areas. So for example, in the prison system, 832,000 people under in jail or waiting for their sentences in the system. The subgroup that explains the demographic explosions, the one that increase the most, are those who are in jail or are waiting for a final sentence for accusation of drug trafficking. But we're not referring to here in this number those traffickers who are in the news, who are shown by all the guns that they carry, that they are. We are referring to mostly to the very small retailer of the everyday commerce of illegal substances. The data shown in the public defensories, in the Brazilian institutions, or at least most of these documents shows that lead us to this conclusion. That the group that grows the most are small retailers of illegal substances. They are being arrested without when they are not, they don't have guns, they are not acting with violences, and they don't, and without a strong bonds with criminal organizations. So they are imprisoned for 5 years, and we know what happens when a young person arrives inside of the prisons. They have to negotiate their life with the power that is in that environment. And unfortunately, as ALEP is not respected and applied around Brazil, we can ensure that the law is not applied. And so these criminal associations are the ones who rules inside of these jails. So this person that is fragile inside of these prisons will have to negotiate with those who rule, with the authority that is there ruling. It's also survival, or that they are able to live throughout this time inside. You don't have to negotiate with these factions. I'm not talking about moral or cultural issues, the problems of values. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about the everyday relationship of the imprisoned with the organizations. I'm talking about a negotiation for survival. They will have to pay. What price will they have to pay to guarantee their own survival in a space in which should be of the responsibility of the state? They will have to do this negotiation in exchange of their lives and also be loyal subsequently for these organizations. What does that mean? And we are talking about a population of imprisoned, which is about 40%, 62% of women. And what we are saying is that we have the massive imprisonment of young, small retailers of illegal substances implies the hiring of future violence. The country is hiring future violence in the name of the fight against the crime. We are hiring these and we are condemning these young people not to be imprisoned or for 5 years. We are condemning them to a life in crime.
We are therefore strengthening the criminal factions, giving them labor for free. And the price that must be paid, in addition, is destroying generations, the lives of generations and their families. What is the color of these youth? They are overwhelmingly black and poor and living in the outskirts. It's so simple, it's banal, it's trivial. I'm embarrassed that I need to reiterate this mantra for so many years now. I confess that this is just an anecdote, but I feel personally defeated. Doesn't mean I'm willing to give up, but these defeats depress us and they accumulate. When we thought we were moving toward a place where we could air out our thoughts and be more democratic and be loyal to human rights, we thought we could do this many years ago. We were welcoming a new time in our country in our redemocratization, but unfortunately, what we saw is a landslide that has brought us to an abyss. The situation is simply unbelievable because there is no rationale that can possibly justify investing in mass incarceration of retailers in the illicit substance market. And why does this happen? I think most important thing is to listen to Minister Almeida. Why does this happen? Is it because of some moral deviation or the lack of competence of the police? No, it's the mechanism, institutionalized mechanisms that reproduce themselves regardless of the abilities and interests of individuals who are located in relevant hierarchical positions in different institutions. So, what are these mechanisms, and how do these institutions and their dynamics reproduce in a way that leads to this terrible, indescribably terrible, and irrational, right? Dysfunctional, but this reproduces classical inequality, class inequality, historical inequality, and it brings us to the most darkest ages of our history, which is slavery, and it intensifies structural racism. So, in this sense, there is a function, you could say, but it's absolutely perverse and it goes against everything we believe in human rights. And our Constitution is promoted in 88, defends uh, against that. It defends human rights. We know that the military police is pressured by all the actors, public opinion, the media, other institutions, to produce results. And it tends to understand that production is equivalent to prisons. But it is constitutionally prohibited from investigating. Well, if it is required to arrest and it cannot investigate, well, then the only thing they can do is to arrest in uh, red-handed. And what crimes can be arrested red-handed? At the present time, we see that the anti-drug law is the solution. And I will try to avoid using any adjectives on the anti-drug law, but the worst adjectives you can think of all apply. It is a monstrosity. It doesn't seem very academic, very scientific, or even very reasonable in terms of rhetoric, but I think monstrous may apply, and it's very realistic. Listen, the military police is mandated to arrest. It cannot conduct investigations. It therefore fills up the prison system with those retailers because their working tool is the anti-drug law. It's like a net that is used to fish, to capture individuals who occupy during the day with handling the retail actions of this practice. And on the next day, they will do other things to make up their monthly salary. Now, we're not talking about international traffic. This moves billions of dollars, and it has already emerged in the so-called legal economy around the world, in the financial market. All profitable fields have benefited from or poisoned from resources that come from the international cocaine trade. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about young people, young boys, and not just any youth, any young boys. We're talking about those who need some kind of money or resources in vulnerable locations. And the military police is not going to go into the middle class or the elite condos in the cities, and they're not going to act on subjective impulses, although they do sometimes, but not not really. In order to move into a condo, they will need a warrant, and this warrant will only be issued if there is a prior investigation, even though it is exploratory in nature. Now, of course, the military police, by not investigating, will not have the appropriate means to request a warrant. It's going to be much more convenient, practical, and efficient in the negative sense to look for the small fish without investigation in those who act in regions that do not require warrants for the police to enter. We know that that is true. And traditionally, the favelas, the villas, and the poorer regions of our cities. And there we see the various inequalities that organize with one another. They combine exponentially and they create this very somber situation that we see today. On the one hand, we have a police model that we inherited from the dictatorship. It was sanctioned in our constitution for political reasons, and it still persists to this day. And it's a sort of inheritance from the dictatorship. It's actually an inheritance of the slavery period, the darkest and worst time in the history of our country. And on the other side, the anti-drug law, which when combined with this model, creates this Dante-like result. And you don't need to have any kind of intellectual sophistication to understand it. But it has become so distant from us to be able to intervene. Of course, for each and every one of us, all of us who dedicate ourselves to the fight for human rights, for democracy worthy of that name, the presence of Silvio Almeida in the ministry is truly uh, warming, and it keeps us from giving up. But the barriers that keep coming up with a fascist discourse that is proliferating and that threatens us increasingly. The situation is so bad, the combination of forces is so bad that defending human rights has become almost boldness. So I think it falls to each and every one of us to continue to move forward and to insist and to try to find the means and the methods to turn our values and make them more plausible, more intelligible, so that we can raise awareness among those who, after being inspired by fear, seek out tyranny, deluding themselves by thinking that they can create protection in this way. Thank you all for the invitation, especially our colleague Walfrido Warde for his generous invitation, and my regards to the moderators as well. Thank you, Professor and former Secretary of Security, Public Security, Professor Luiz Eduardo Soares. Now, Minister Silva Medo. Well, firstly, good morning to everyone who's here with us. I'd like to explain why I came up here. I was at an event with Minister Marina Silva and Minister Guajajara in a tribute to Don Fipes and Bruno Pereira, who were murdered in 2022. And for my talk, I said I had a very difficult time speaking from a sitting position. I really prefer to speak when I'm standing. I think my voice carries better. You tremble a lot less. But Minister Marina Silva warned me. She said that my challenge in speaking while sitting down was going to go away when I reached her age. But considering how vigorous Minister Silva is, and we're not so different in age, I will continue to speak standing up and also to pay tribute to all of the people who are here and who very kindly devote their time to listen to us. I'd like to thank the IREE as represented by my dear friend Walfrido Warde. Thank you again, Walfrido, once again, demonstrating your commitment to Brazil, bringing the most important voices, often dissonant voices, to make this space perhaps a space of democratic convergence. Brazil is increasingly difficult in the sense, but we continue to try. And in this attempt, we may bear fruit in the future. We're fighting for ourselves, of course, but we're also fighting for those who have gone and who are worthy of being dignified for their fight. But we're also fighting prospectively for those who are not here. So this attempt is very important. I'd also like to profusely thank Dr. Vicente Candido, for whom I have a long admiration. We've known each other for a long time in the fights in the anti-racist movement in Sao Paulo when you were a deputy in Sao Paulo. And what can I say about Mr. Suarez, this champion of human rights, this huge specialist in public security? He honors all of us, and he is so generous with his words because for me, they can only be the fruit of the generosity that comprises him. So I would really like to hug this great intellectual, this friend, this great politician. Why not? Mr. Soares, it's an honor to be here with you. All right. Well, I I thought a lot about how I would organize my talk here at the seminar. I thought about how I could contribute with some thoughts in this event. And considering the great quality of all the debaters at this auditorium and on the other rooms, I thought the best way to do that would be to focus on questions that tend to not be discussed by other speakers. At the same time, I also thought of raising up a flag. Maybe I could speak as a professor, who I am, or a minister of state, which I also am at the moment. But after some reflection, I concluded that our time, maybe in calmer times, I could speak as a professor, but in the face of the contradictions that are even more acute in our period of time and also in front of us, we're in historical times, just as in the 1930s, in the turn of the 19th century and the 1970s, those periods of time where we need to act and think. We need to exercise what is often called praxis. In other words, theoretical action and the theory of action. You cannot just theorize, you need to act. I think if you turn on your televisions and look at the world around you, you will see that we are being dominated by what the Germans call Dummheit. Adorno turns this into a concept when he talks about fascism. Dummheit has many possible translations. Foolishness, stupidity is one I really like. But Adorno is not referring just to an individual trait. It's not a curse, a slur. When he says Dummheit, he is referring to a sort of state that combats intelligence. It's almost like expelling reason and intelligence. So it's a state. And he uses that to talk about fascism,
which is characterized by the stupidity for the against science and knowledge. So those who want to fight against fascism, wants to fight against the violence and human rights, there we have to put intelligence back on the table. I'm in favor of it, and the didactics is very important, but it's important to understand that in Brazil, one thing that we lack to fight of the challenges that we face is the aesthetics. We need ethics, but also aesthetics. Fascism has aesthetics. We also need to have one, the one to conduct us to beautiful things, interesting, cool things. That's why we cannot prevent the Brazilian people to have our knowledge, intelligence, to talk about complex things. This is the most complex things to live with a minimal wage in this country. That's why I chose a way in which I put myself as a teacher, but also as Minister of State, because I can't only talk as a teacher, putting theories and not presenting possibilities and ways to tackle them. So, because I'm in the condition of a Minister of State. That's why I cannot understand the problem of public security without understanding our times, which means understand key factors in our lives. So I'll be radical in a way of an old philosopher, a German one, which would say to go into the roots of the fundamentals and challenges that we're facing right now. Our times are facing a deep crisis with many dimensions, a monster with many heads. I like this metaphor of the monsters with many heads because in one side is the crisis, but the monster is only one, and the crisis have to be seen as a specific one, but there are many other aspects that influences them. The times don't allow us to talk about all of these dimensions. But what I want to say is the Occident is going through a deep crisis, and to find a diagnosis is very hard, and we might do it wrongly. The public security policies has to be seen from the political spectrum. Maybe we have electoral results to talk about violence because the violence is, let's say, spectacular in a way that fighting criminality through guns and violence, put the force and citizens into risks, and these have aesthetics that's very powerful, but it also shows that we are unable to deal with structural problems, so not dealing with the important issues. Therefore, after because of the electoral results, we have the social medias permeating the psyche of people, but doesn't bring results in the point of view of public security. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, who is democratic here needs to dispute the concept of public security. The fascists, the enemies of democracy, cannot be dancing samba alone in the room. So, from 1945 to 73, the so-called Western world lived what the economists said years of glory, economic development, amplification of rights. In Brazil, as we all know, it has increased into rates that are impressive. We had a rupture from this moment of economic growth, and I'd like to remember that the capitalism in the United States at that time was also affected by apartheid, the segregation, racial segregation, and other horrors that we all know. Harry Braven used to talk about that. So we know that we have these issues. But look, in the 70s, since a specific date, 15th of August 71, when US broke the deal to the money deal from the gold to the dollar, we had a huge increase. The process made this prosperity period finished, and we go into 80s with a completely different world. The pathway taken from those crises, still in the 70s, it was a radical opening of the market, deregularization of the market, and the unprotecting of the labor laws. So there was a big change because in the new world without regulation, these desires should not be contained anymore. The effort of the government was to have jobs so we could control inflation and establish the new currency. Some actors were forced through a series of pressure mechanisms to apply this resectory. Also, the military war had to apply these new rules. These are wrapped as a discourse of development. But the truth is that this mix of ideas was in the affirmation of egoism and private solutions. That's why this flourished many scientific searches which were not completely clear. Who doesn't remember the egoist genius saying that the life of human being would be without limits for survival and will be very complex? All this is important to remember, because if you don't remember this, we will understand the public security. There are challenges which are communitary, because security is fluid for the community. If we don't have the community involved, there's no way any public security policy work. All this dynamic of economic crisis increased the speed with the crisis in the year 2000, and we all have seen this. I remember in the crisis of 2008, many economists believed that this was the end of the neoliberalism. As it has happened in the post-war, the elites of the world would understand that it would not be possible to save economy with anarchy. So that's not what happened. On the contrary, we saw some people doubling the bet, and it took the world to a disaster. Now, in this moment, maybe we are living a changing in these aspects. We live in a time of not many resources and with a lot of subjectivity and the lack of empathy. The importance of it is important to understand that scarcity is a mark of time, and we live maybe in a neoliberalism. Thomas Hobbes said that the problem is not that the human beings are bad or the instincts are violent. The problem is that because we are similar, we are not able to establish the differences. The second reason that he says is that we need to prevent attacking in insecurity. We do that from the standpoint that who attacks first wins. Many people were educated in the past few decades with the ideas that resources are scarce and part of the humanity will be left outside. Or even worse, the same things that I desire and I have, and that's why I attack first. So if you read the literature after 11th of September, you'd understand that those who attack first win. Or I want a state that attack first preventively. Please note that if I attack to prevent, I attack people for what they are and not for what they did. Because to be preventive is not a conduct. I consider that this is criminal. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a world that uses public security to manage populations. It's public security which happens almost as a demographic character. So we have some people that have to be prevented and other people that have to be protected, and some other excluded. So they don't have space in society, and they are left in the shadows. And this produces a lot of results. Part of these people will die, and part of them will go into the worst kinds of jobs. Some of them will be judged in prisons, imprisoned. These people will never be looked at like properly.
Já escrevi sobre isso. É o racismo, não tem outra coisa. É preciso signo claro, que seja perceptível ao olhar, que permita realizar essa gestão, colocar em funcionamento essa técnica de larga escala. Os mecanismos de segurança pública, aqui, como no resto do mundo, são parte fundamental da gestão da ordem. Ou, se nós quisermos, de gestão da desordem. É disso que se trata, gestão da desordem e não da ordem. Porque, dado o tamanho da crise que estamos vivendo, a desordem vai penetrando em todas as camadas do tecido social. É nesse tipo de dinâmica social, e nesse tipo de dinâmica social, o ódio, a cólera, a ira são fundamentais. Não é possível excluir, massacrar, conduzir à destruição tanta gente sem uma paixão. É preciso ter um desejo de morte. Essa gestão dos miseráveis, dos cronicamente inabsorvíveis, dos deserdados da terra, é feita com razão, uma fria razão calculista. Tudo bem, mas também precisa ser feita com paixão, e as paixões são exatamente essas: o ódio, a ira, a cólera. Essa cólera mobiliza, esse ódio transforma pessoas comuns em militantes, porque ele tensiona, retesa, dá sentido à existência sem sentidos e dá prazer também. Sabem quem já sabia isso? O Aristóteles já falava isso na retórica, né? Resumindo o que eu disse até agora, as políticas de segurança pública, na minha visão, são a consubstanciação do atual momento do capitalismo. Mas não só, como a forma através da qual a gestão desse capitalismo em crise é feita. Senhoras e senhores, se a gente fazer uma filosofia da segurança pública, nós vamos chegar à conclusão de que cada período histórico, cada etapa da organização da vida social produz um determinado tipo de medo, uma forma de medo, né? Eu vejo isso muito na cultura pop, né? Você vai ver os monstros dos anos 60, 70, eram os alienígenas, os invasores de corpos, né? O famoso filme, né? Depois foi refilmado pelo John Carpenter no final dos anos 70, né? Enigma de Outro Mundo, o nome do filme. Mas vejam, o medo é do estrangeiro, daquele que se esconde entre nós. Emulava muito a Guerra Fria, né? Quem são os grandes monstros de hoje, né? Não são os monstros do final do século XIX, quando você tinha medo da ciência, que era o Conde Drácula, o Frankenstein, né? Os nossos monstros de hoje, eles parecem muito com aquele grupo de pessoas maltrapilhas, né? Com problemas de saúde, que ficam no centro de São Paulo, né? Eles parecem o quê? Os zumbis, né? Notaram? É isso. Ou seja, cada período histórico produz o seu monstro, e cada período histórico produz um monstro que deve ser eliminado. Ou seja, é a forma jurídica do medo, é a segurança pública. Pois bem, isso não quer dizer que as coisas sejam perfeitamente funcionais ao sistema. A crise é tão grande, prezados e prezadas, que muitas vezes as políticas são disfuncionais, elas desorganizam tudo. O Luiz Eduardo Soares é um grande especialista no assunto, ele pode falar, como já falou, muito melhor do que eu, mas o fato do Estado estar perdendo em larga escala, o Estado está perdendo em larga escala o monopólio legítimo do uso da força. O Estado brasileiro está sendo entregue às garras do crime organizado. O Brasil está perdendo o controle do seu território. É isso que está acontecendo. Tá? E essas políticas de ficar matando gente pobre, de colocar policial para matar e para morrer, né? Essas políticas estão cada vez mais fortalecendo o crime organizado. Quem é a favor desse tipo de coisa que tem se feito no Brasil, que tem se construído no Brasil, e que se chama de segurança pública, é contra os policiais. É contra a vida. E agora eu quero dizer mais uma coisa que eu acho que é importante. Quando a gente fala isso, né, para algumas pessoas, alguém sempre dá, alguém que é alinhado com esse tipo de pensamento, que eu não vou chamar de reacionário, eu vou chamar de pensamento inútil, porque não produz nada. Quem é alinhado com isso, geralmente, usa a cartada, né, fala assim, mas eu sei atirar, eu já estive na linha de frente. Essa pessoa, no máximo, é especialista em matar, mas não é especialista em segurança pública. Isso é outra coisa. E vocês perceberam uma coisa? O sujeito coloca a sua condição pessoal como se fosse algo que desse legitimidade à sua atuação. Sabe como é que chama isso? Olha só que engraçado. Chama identitarismo. Não é verdade? Você colocar a sua identidade, porque depois o identitário somos nós. Olha que coisa engraçada. Isso é identitarismo. Porque daí eu posso virar e falar o seguinte, eu não sei o que é matar, mas eu sei o que é morrer. Eu sou preto, vim da periferia, fui advogado de pobre, fui advogado de mães que perderam seus filhos. Aí, se for para ficar jogando na cartada identitária, a gente não sai do lugar. Esse é o ponto. Agora, vejam só, e aí eu quero, uma última parte para terminar, não quero cansar muito os senhoras e senhores. A violência policial aqui, no Brasil, ela é assustadora, mas, veja, a gente só fala, não basta só falar da violência policial, da violência do Estado. Né? O Brasil é um país que as pessoas se matam entre si. Há uma violência cotidiana. O crime organizado mata. As facções matam. Se matam entre si. Porque senão a gente fica só num aspecto isolado, né? Fica parecendo que é só a violência do Estado. Não é só isso, não. É um país que se organiza a partir de práticas violentas. E aí é o seguinte, em alguns estados, eu vou citar abertamente aqui, como São Paulo, né, que é o meu estado, a violência está crescendo. E nós sabemos, falo agora da letalidade policial, e nós sabemos que essa letalidade é de mão dupla. Porque sempre que aumenta a letalidade policial, morrem mais policiais. Por isso que quem incentiva a violência da polícia não é amigo da polícia, é inimigo da polícia. Só mesmo em sociedade, uma sociedade muito doente, nós podemos acreditar o contrário. Quem incentiva o homicídio não é inimigo apenas de quem morre, é inimigo também de quem mata, de quem aperta o gatilho. Isso parece muito óbvio. Né? E é por isso, eu quero anunciar agora vou vestir o terno de ministro de Estado. O Ministério dos Direitos Humanos está numa luta profunda para que nós possamos reorganizar os nossos instrumentos, a nossa capacidade institucional. Walfrido, eu estou obcecado com esse tema da capacidade institucional, porque a gente fica discutindo direitos humanos, fica só no campo das grandes temas, das ideias, da moralidade e tal, dos princípios de justiça. Não, eu quero saber o seguinte, se esses princípios podem se realizar na prática, e para isso eu tenho que ter estrutura e tenho que ter orçamento. Então, eu tenho que discutir capacidade institucional, quais são os instrumentos que eu tenho para lidar com segurança pública, ser ministro de direitos humanos. Porque depois a conta cai no Ministério dos Direitos Humanos, cai em cima de mim. Né? E eu não sou o ministro da moral, nem da ética, eu sou da política. E aí, para fazer política, tem que ter instrumento, tem que ter capacidade institucional. Por isso que ontem nós também fizemos um seminário, que, coincidentemente ou não, foi sequenciado por esse, para discutir capacidade institucional das políticas de direitos humanos no Brasil. Porque, senão, nós que defendemos
Because otherwise, we, people who defend life, we also need to fight organized crime. Because anyone who says otherwise is lying. Organized crime is the enemy of human rights. It must be combated. But listen, we also need to fight for the existence of institutional power, budget, so that we can instrumentalize and create the institutional pillars that will handle the problems that later go to the ministry. I need to have the conditions to fulfill the role that has been given to me by the generosity of President Lula, to whom I am very grateful for giving me the chance to serve my country. Now, listen, in a country such as the one where racism was and still is functional, it's not a dysfunction, it is a function. It's a fundamental and structural element of social life. We need to think about Brazil as a country. And the most important of those, I'd like to call Guimarães Rosa now. The main ingredient is what life requires of us, which is courage. The courage to face a consensus. Courage to face the neoliberal consensus. We need to be brave enough to face that. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not possible to deal with tragedies such as what we're dealing with in Rio Grande do Sul without a free and adequate budget to save those people. We cannot deal with the tragedy of poverty and public security unless we can be sovereign over our own lives. We need to prevent our country from becoming pessimistic, trying to convince us that if we are good boys, we will be handed prosperity. It won't be given to us for free. We need to listen to our thinkers. There's not going to be any development without a good dose of rebellion, without being insubordinate to the great powers outside and whose friends in here have in store for our country. A second ingredient is that we must stop massacring the population. Now listen to me. When I talk about human rights policies, I'm also saying that we must treat people with respect. We need to value human life. I'm not saying just that. I'm saying if we want an economically viable country, we need to repress crime. We need to defend people. We need to defend what people have. Imagine how much hatred someone has when, in an economy that is based on platforms, they are on their phone in the street and someone in a bikes by and takes their phone off their hand. Imagine how much anger they will feel. But now think about the major sources of organized crime. What are the financial controls, border controls? That's what we need to do. We need to stop being so lax in the way how capital moves around and takes the fruits of crime, the financial fruits, and brings to those who are not going to be murdered by the officers in this insane war that doesn't spare any of us. Now listen, we need to repress crime, defend people, defend life, defend women in a country that is leading the world in violence against women. But it's shocking. I need to mention this. He wrote in 1764. His name is Cesare Beccaria. 1764. The state cannot be an instrument of passions or hatred. Cesare Beccarista wrote this in 1764. Well, this hatred is class hatred. It does not exist to satiate violent passions. We are in a society where many people are lusting for violence. No, it needs to be reduced so that they can act within the law. So my takeaway question is there a lack of compatibility between human rights and public security? What I mean is, people who say this, I was going to say fake news, but I'll be more direct, they are lying. To be honest, if we look at the architecture of our Constitution and our laws, there is no public security policy without human rights. No such thing. But the opposite also holds true. There is no such thing as human rights without a public security policy. Any person who says they are doing public security without respecting the basic human rights in our Constitution and internationally, to which Brazil is a signatory, they are not doing public security. They are doing things arbitrarily. They are putting together a militia. They're doing something else. It's a crime. They are acting based on illegal and criminal instructions. There is no public security policy that can ever be based on the constant concern with human rights. Okay? And I know it's a lot. We say human rights and we start thinking about criminality, about correctly respecting the individual rights, even of those who are accused of committing crimes. But when I say human rights, I'm talking about teenagers. I'm talking about the elderly. We're talking about the LGBTQIA+ population who die, who are murdered in this country. We're talking about people with disabilities. We're talking about people who live in the streets. That is what I'm talking about. So listen, we cannot fall into those old dichotomies, including those that claim that that human rights policies prevent police forces from acting. This is another lie. You know why? Because a state that is prevented from using force stops being a state, and often protecting human rights requires the use of force by agents of the state. Often we will need to use force to fight organized crime. The use of force will also need to be an option for those who want to disorganize our country or engage in a coup. So a state is in charge of public security and force, but in what circumstances, to what extent, and against whom is force used? That is the question. By making public security synonymous with violence, they're trying to hide the fact that many of these human rights documents specifically deal with the use of force. These human rights documents talk about the use of force, including lethal force. They set out the parameters for that to occur. Look, in 1979, through Resolution 34/169, the UN General Assembly adopted the Code of Conduct for employees responsible for applying the law. And they state that it calls to security agents to serve the community, protect people, respect the principle of human dignity, and support the human rights of every person. Security agents. And in 1990, the UN, advised by that code of conduct, adopted the basic principles on the use of force and firearms by those responsible for applying the law. And right at the beginning, it reiterates that the code applying the law in the use of force and firearms is a social service that determines that the states, the member states, should develop protocols for the use of firearms with an eye to reducing violence and, quote, orders to shoot to kill during concrete actions and policies, shoot to kill policies. Do you see the difference? One thing is an order to shoot to kill in a concrete operation, and it's something else entirely to have a policy for shoot to kill. And this is what we're seeing in Brazilian states. That's the difference. So there is a regulation in the field of human rights. So no one can say that there's no rule, that there's no parameters, that human rights get in the way of police actions. On the contrary, the standards, the human rights standards, distinguish militia from police forces. That's what we're talking about. And this protocol exists to protect police officers. You know why? Because we often see that officers in a regular operation are often put into a trap and then they are abandoned. They're left on their own and everyone turns their back on them. That's what we're going to fight. That's why I said the Public Security Forum and Human Rights Forum are putting together a human rights program for police officers. We're going to present this with Renato Sérgio Lima and their team and the Ministry of Human Rights and the Ministry of Public Security.
Okay, so to finish, I could mention many precedents here. The manual for the use of gunfire for officers, the American Declaration for the Rights, the precedent for the Inter-American, everything is there, the parameters are there. You can do a protocol. We can make a national policy and create a protocol to protect the population and also the officers. Therefore, what is lacking is political will to build the instruments to fight it. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, another measure which is a key is that we need to rescue the prisons from the criminal organizations. It's not a lot of states that we need. The states left the prisons and left for the organized crimes, and now they have to survive. And they become now a lot worse when they leave than when they entered it. The state has abandoned its key role to manage what happened in the prisons. We have to go back there to work there. We're talking about science. We know what works and what doesn't work. What the reactionaries say has never worked. The politicians they say that the left-wing politics doesn't work. But we are applying a recipe that has never worked, and we double the bet on the stupidity and the dumbheit. The human rights need to be treated seriously, away from the manipulation which want to make the public security into violence and arms which generate profit from its defenders. We need to look into the strategies and care for the people and avoid hate and promote organized crimes. These are keys to prevent. Nowadays, Brazil needs a public security policy for its sovereignty. If we don't have it, we are going to lose our national sovereignty. That's what we're talking about. If this is key and for the creation of democratic society, we need to understand that this can be done if the respect to the Brazilian people is in the center of all the public security policies. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank to this beautiful speech of Minister Silvio Almeida, also our generation, for your talk, for your contribution for the country at this moment. Let's do an official picture before I pass the floor to our ceremonialist. This is human rights in practice. We'd like to thank the excellent contributions. I'd like to also to thank you for your presence. We don't come here on Earth for sightseeing. We came here to practice citizenship. So your contribution is great in this sense. Congratulations. Thank you for those excellent contributions. Thank you very much. We're going to do a pause for lunch and return with our activities at 2 p.m. here in this same place. In the afternoon, we're going to have phones to listen to the foreign presenters. So you have instructions to pick up one device. I hope to see you soon at 2 p.m.